Welcome, dear listener. I am Caleb, and tonight I will guide you on a journey of deep relaxation and quiet transformation. Allow your body to sink even deeper into comfort as all the tension from your day gently melts away. Feel safe and embraced as if you were in a calm and protected place. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Why? Because this way, every night, you'll have access to stories created to speak directly to your subconscious mind. Stories that help you attract prosperity, open new paths, and transform your mindset while you sleep. Each video here is an opportunity to plant seeds of abundance that over time bloom into real results in your life. Now, let your breathing slow down. Let your muscles relax completely. As I tell you this story, every word will plant seeds of prosperity deep within your subconscious. You don't need to focus or analyze. Just listen and allow the story to flow through you like a gentle river of golden abundance. The first light of morning slipped quietly through the curtains of the small apartment where Samuel lived. Casting pale stripes across the worn wooden floor, he stirred in his bed. The blanket half tangled around his legs, and his hand reached automatically toward the bedside table for the old silver watch his grandfather had given him. The ticking was faint, steady, like a reminder that a day was waiting whether he was ready or not. With a long, slow sigh, he sat up, feeling the heaviness in his shoulders, and for a moment he rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. His reflection stared back at him from the mirrored wardrobe, messy hair, soft stubble, and the faint shadows of sleepless nights under his eyes. He pushed himself up and slipped his feet into the sandals by the bed, the leather worn smooth from years of use. Walking to the bathroom, he turned on the small overhead light, blinking at the pale yellow glow. He leaned over the sink, turned the faucet, and splashed cold water on his face, feeling it drip from his chin onto his t-shirt. He picked up his toothbrush, added a line of minty paste, and began brushing slowly, staring at himself, wondering how his life had become a string of quiet mornings like this. The narrator's voice drifts softly here. Sometimes life feels like an endless repetition of small moments, but even small moments carry seeds of change if you notice them, and then it fades back into the story. Samuel rinsed his mouth, ran a hand through his dark, slightly curly hair, and patted it down. He looked at himself again and whispered under his breath, "Maybe today is different," though he did not fully believe it. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed softly as he opened it, taking out the carton of milk and pouring it into a chipped mug. He heated it slowly on the stove, standing in the faint smell of gas and dust. The apartment was small. One bedroom, one kitchen, and a view of the alley below, where a cat leaped gracefully onto a trash can and stared at him as if measuring his soul. Samuel stirred a spoon of honey into his warm milk, watching the swirl of gold dissolve, and sat by the window. The city was waking up. Distant horns, a bark, the sound of a neighbor's radio playing a song he didn't know. He sipped and let the warmth slide down into him. He thought of Mara, his partner, still asleep in the bedroom. She worked late shifts at the library and often woke with the sun already high. Samuel loved her, but lately their days felt like mismatched clocks. He glanced back at her silhouette under the blanket, feeling a mix of tenderness and quiet worry. Finishing his drink, he washed the mug carefully, placed it upside down on the drying rack, and decided to step outside. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and the distant scent of bread from the bakery downstairs. He slipped on his jacket, checked that he had his keys, and walked out. The early air was cool, brushing against his face like an invitation to notice the world. He walked past the bakery, where the windows were fogged with heat, and the scent of butter and sugar curled into the street. An elderly man nodded at him, sweeping the sidewalk with slow, deliberate strokes. Samuel wandered toward the park, his sandals whispering against the pavement. And in the stillness of morning, he felt a tiny thread of peace he couldn't quite name. The narrator's voice comes again, quietly thoughtful. Sometimes the beginning of change comes in the simplest moments, like noticing the way sunlight filters through the leaves, or how the smell of bread makes you feel like a child again. Samuel paused by the park gates, watched a stray dog chase a pigeon, and smiled faintly without thinking. He walked the gravel path slowly, passing benches slick with dew, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the air filling his lungs as if it wanted to stay there. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "I want more than this." And though the world did not answer out loud, he felt a soft wind pass over his face, almost like a reply. Samuel lingered in the park, the gravel crunching softly under his worn sandals as he followed the winding path past the dew-dotted grass. He noticed the way sunlight broke into fractured pieces through the trees, like shards of soft gold scattered across the earth. He slowed his steps, almost unconsciously matching the rhythm of the breeze, his fingers brushing along the cold metal of the park fence. In the distance, he could hear the faint hum of traffic mixed with the laughter of a child chasing a balloon. He watched the balloon rise a little too high, tugging at the string, and for a moment he felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Maybe nostalgia, maybe longing. He sat on a wooden bench, still damp with morning moisture, the cool seeping through his jacket, and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The narrator's voice drifted in, soft and calm. Sometimes the moments we slow down are the ones that show us what we have been ignoring. The spaces between thoughts, the quiet parts of life that whisper what we really desire. Then the voice faded, leaving only the distant chirping of sparrows. Samuel reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook, and flipped to a blank page. The edges of the paper were bent and soft from being carried too long. He held the pen over the page. Unsure what to write, he wrote the date, then paused, staring at the faint steam of his own breath. Finally, he wrote, "I don't know what I'm looking for," and then under it, "I think I want to feel alive again." He stared at the words for a long time, as if they might dissolve into the page if you waited. The sound of footsteps approached, slow and measured, and Samuel glanced up to see an older woman in a long coat feeding pieces of bread to pigeons. She smiled at him briefly, her face lined but warm, and continued walking, leaving a small trail of crumbs and birds behind her. Samuel watched her until she turned the corner, feeling a strange comfort in the ordinary ritual. He leaned back on the bench and tilted his head toward the sky. Clouds were moving slowly, pale and delicate. He closed his eyes again. The narrator returned for a moment, quiet as the wind. Life often waits for us to notice the small openings it leaves in our days, the soft invitations to change. Samuel felt the sun shift across his face and stood, stretching his arms slightly, He walked to the small park cafe, still opening for the morning, and ordered a cup of black coffee. The barista nodded, barely awake, and slid the warm paper cup across the counter. Samuel took a sip and let the bitter taste settle on his tongue, then walked along the edge of the fountain. The water was clear and reflected the sky like a second world. He dropped a single coin in and watched it sink, ripples breaking the calm surface. He thought of Mara again, probably awake now, moving slowly in the small apartment, maybe brushing her hair in front of the mirror. He felt a pull in his chest, a desire to return. Yet he stayed a moment longer, leaning on the cool stone of the fountain. The city was louder now, life-picking, up speed, and Samuel finally turned toward home, walking with a slow, deliberate pace. The streets filled with the smell of fresh bread, early traffic, and distant voices. He climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment, each step creaking softly, and unlocked the door. Inside, Mara was sitting on the edge of the bed, tying her hair back. She looked up and smiled, sleepy but genuine. Samuel smiled back and set the coffee cup down on the bedside table. The narrator whispered once more, quietly, "In the gentle routines of love and life, there are seeds waiting to grow, if we dare to water them." And then the story slipped back into silence, letting the room fill only with the sound of breathing and the faint ticking of the silver watch. Mara stretched her arms and yawned softly as Samuel placed the coffee on the bedside table. The smell of dark roast filled the room, and she murmured a quiet thank you, her voice still wrapped in the weight of sleep. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the sunlight from the window brushing gently across her cheek. Catching in the strands of her hair that had slipped loose, he reached out and tucked one behind her ear, a small gesture, almost hesitant, and she smiled again, faint but real. He felt the warmth of that moment settle somewhere deep in his chest. The narrator's voice flowed softly into the silence. Love often hides in the smallest movements, in the touches we barely notice, in the unspoken acts that carry the weight of care. Then the voice dissolved, leaving the hum of the city as the only sound. Mara took a slow sip of the coffee, savoring it, and Samuel stood to make breakfast, moving to the kitchen with a sense of quiet purpose. He opened the fridge, the cold air spilling onto his skin, and took out eggs, a slice of bread, and a small jar of strawberry jam. He cracked the eggs into the pan, the sizzle breaking the calm morning rhythm, the smell of butter spreading into the room. He toasted the bread on the old stove, the edges browning unevenly, and spread the jam carefully, noticing how the bright red shimmered in the sunlight like glass. He carried the plate to the table, and Mara joined him, wearing her faded blue robe, her hair now tied into a loose knot. They ate slowly, not talking much, just listening to the soft symphony of morning sounds. A neighbor walking down the hall, the distant honk of a car, the chirp of a single bird perched on the balcony railing. Samuel's mind drifted, and he remembered the notebook in his pocket. He thought about the words he had written and felt a strange pull toward them, as if they were waiting for him to take the next step. Mara noticed his silence and tilted her head, asking if he was all right. He nodded with a small smile and said he was just thinking. She didn't press further. Instead, she finished her coffee and leaned back in the chair. Letting the sunlight touch her face, the narrator returned, gentle and reflective. Sometimes, the first steps toward change are invisible to others. They happen quietly in the spaces between our breaths, and yet they shape everything that comes after. Samuel stood and began to clean the dishes, the water running warm over his hands, bubbles forming and popping like tiny, fragile worlds. He stacked the clean plates carefully on the rack and glanced at Mara, who had moved to the window, staring out at the alley where the cat from earlier now stretched lazily on the hood of a car. She said it reminded her of the cat they had seen on their trip to the countryside last summer. And he nodded, feeling a memory rise like mist. The smell of grass and river water, the sound of cicadas, the way he had felt almost free there. When the morning chores were done, he grabbed his jacket again, thinking a walk would help clear his head. Mara kissed his cheek softly and said she would read for a while before work. He left the apartment, the door clicking shut behind him, the stairwell cool and dim. Outside, the air had shifted, warmer. Now, carrying the scent of bread mixed with the faint sharpness of city dust, he walked with no particular direction, letting his feet guide him past the small shops, opening their doors, a florist arranging bright tulips in the window, a man unloading crates of oranges from a van, a dog sniffing every corner as its owner checked their phone. Samuel felt the pulse of life moving around him, and for the first time in weeks, he truly paid attention. The narrator spoke softly again. Life is always offering us small invitations to wake up, to notice, to breathe more deeply. And, if we accept them, the path forward begins to unfold, almost on its own. Samuel paused at the crosswalk, the red light reflecting in his eyes. And when it changed, he stepped forward slowly, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face as the city exhaled around him. Samuel crossed the street slowly, the sound of cars rumbling in the distance, blending with the faint chatter of people starting their day. He walked along the sidewalk, lined with small trees, their leaves trembling lightly in the breeze, and past a bakery where the warm scent of fresh pastries curled out into the air. His stomach gave a quiet grumble, though he ignored it. Instead, pausing to watch the baker through the window, a man in a white apron dusted with flour, carefully placing golden croissants in a row. Samuel continued his walk, letting the rhythm of his steps and the soft weight of the morning carry him. He noticed the way sunlight hit a small puddle on the pavement, creating a mirror that reflected the sky, and for a moment he crouched, tracing the reflection with his eyes, feeling a strange, childlike wonder flicker inside him. The narrator's voice whispered gently, "Even the simplest reflections can remind us of who we are, or who we once hoped to be." The voice faded, and Samuel stood. Brushing the dust from his hands, he wandered toward the edge of the city, where a small river cut through the park, the water moving lazily, carrying the reflection of the trees and sky. He leaned on the railing of the small bridge, listening to the faint gurgle of water, and closed his eyes, letting the sound soak into him. When he opened them, he saw an older man sitting on a nearby bench, tossing crumbs to a group of pigeons, and smiling to himself. Samuel hesitated, then walked over. The man looked up and nodded, as if expecting him. Samuel sat down quietly. They exchanged a polite greeting, and then fell into a comfortable silence. The city's sounds seemed distant here, almost muted. After a while, the old man spoke about the river. how he had been visiting this spot for over 20 years, feeding the birds, watching the seasons change. He said the river always taught him patience. Samuel listened, nodding, feeling that strange pull in his chest again, a sense that there was something he had been missing. The narrator's voice entered softly. Sometimes wisdom does not arrive in grand gestures. It sits quietly on park benches and waits for us to notice. Samuel smiled faintly at the old man's words and thanked him before standing to leave. His walk continued along a narrow street lined with old brick buildings, some with peeling paint, some with windows overflowing with flower pots. He passed a shop selling second-hand books and felt drawn to the dusty glass. He went inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The air smelled of paper and time. He wandered between the shelves, letting his fingers trail along the spines of old novels and forgotten histories. He paused at a book with a faded green cover and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, a message to someone named Clara. It said simply, "Never stop dreaming." Samuel felt his chest tighten, the words echoing the thoughts he had scribbled in his own notebook earlier. He closed the book gently and bought it without a second thought. Walking back outside into the sun, the narrator whispered again. Life often leaves us breadcrumbs, small reminders of the paths we can still choose. He continued toward home, the bag with a book swinging softly at his side. As he approached the apartment building, he saw Mara stepping out, her hair now braided, her work bag slung over her shoulder. She smiled when she saw him and waved. He waved back, feeling a sudden urge to run up to her, to tell her about the river, the bench, the note in the book, but he stayed quiet. Instead, they shared a quick hug, and she said she would be home late after work. He watched her walk away, her figure blending into the movement of the city. He went inside and climbed the stairs, his mind swirling with quiet thoughts. And when he entered the apartment, he placed the book carefully on the bedside table. Sitting on the edge of the bed, the room filled only with the faint ticking of the silver watch, and the distant hum of life outside. The afternoon stretched slowly as Samuel lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows of leaves moved with the wind outside. He listened to the muted city noise, distant car horns, and the occasional bark of a dog blending into a soft hum. He reached over and picked up the faded green book again, feeling the texture of its worn cover against his fingertips. He flipped through the pages, letting the sound of the paper calm him, until he found the handwritten note once more. Never stop dreaming. The words seemed to speak louder, this time, resonating in the quiet space of the room. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift. The narrator's voice slipped in softly. Dreams are like seeds. They ask for patience, attention, and trust, and even when we cannot see them growing, they are reaching for the light. Samuel let the reflection sink in, his breathing slowing as the warmth of the sun shifted across his face. After a while, he stood and decided to clean the apartment. Starting with the kitchen, he filled the sink with warm water and soap, watching the bubbles rise, scrubbing each plate slowly, as if the rhythm of washing could wash his thoughts too. He moved to the living area, picking up a stray sock, folding the blanket neatly over the back of the chair, arranging the shoes by the door. He noticed how quiet it felt, almost sacred. Like creating order outside gave him space inside. he went to the small bathroom, wiped the mirror with a cloth, and looked at his own reflection. The faint circles under his eyes, the way his hair had fallen messily over his forehead. He ran his fingers through it, feeling the texture. He splashed cool water on his face, letting droplets fall down his neck, and took a deep, slow breath. The narrator appeared again, softly. When we care for our surroundings, even in the smallest ways, we remind ourselves that we are worthy of spaces that feel alive. Samuel left the bathroom and returned to the bedroom, pulling the curtains wider to let the afternoon light flood in. He opened the window and listened to the distant sounds of the street. Footsteps, laughter, the faint melody of a street musician playing a guitar somewhere down the block. He sat by the window for a while, resting his arms on the sill, and watched as a single cloud drifted lazily across the sky. Time felt stretched, like the world had slowed down just for him. Eventually, he rose and decided to write again. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Today I saw a river that made me feel alive, and an old man who reminded me to be patient, and a note that told me not to stop dreaming." He paused, thinking, then added, "Maybe life is speaking, quietly, if I listen." He closed the notebook gently, as if sealing the thought inside. The narrator's voice entered again, quiet and encouraging. Life always speaks to those willing to listen. Its whispers guide us toward the doors of change, but only if we choose to notice them. Samuel leaned back on the bed and closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own body sink into the mattress. The ticking of the silver watch was steady, like a heartbeat he could trust, and the rhythm carried him into a soft, reflective stillness. The evening sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the walls of the apartment. Samuel rose from the bed slowly, his body feeling heavy but calm, and walked to the kitchen where the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. He opened it and pulled out a small container of leftover soup, pouring it into a pot and stirring slowly, the steam curling upward in delicate swirls. He watched it rise as if it carried his quiet thoughts to the ceiling. He prepared a single slice of bread and buttered it gently, setting it on a plate. The simple meal felt almost ceremonial. He carried it to the small dining table and sat down, eating slowly, tasting each bite with presence. He noticed the way the butter melted into the bread, the way the warmth of the soup spread through his chest. The narrator's voice entered softly. Small rituals of care are acts of abundance. Even when life feels quiet, every moment of presence is a seed for greater things. Samuel nodded slightly to himself. Finishing his meal, he washed the dishes again, the warm water soothing against his hands, and wiped the counter carefully before stepping to the window. Outside, the sky had deepened into shades of pink and purple. The streetlights flickered to life one by one, and the city began to hum with its nighttime rhythm. He decided to take another walk. Slipping on his shoes and grabbing his jacket, the stairwell was cool and dim, and the scent of someone cooking garlic and herbs lingered faintly in the air. He stepped out into the street and felt the crisp evening air against his face. He walked slowly past the same bakery, now dark and closed, the smell of bread replaced by the faint metallic scent of the night. He passed a row of small shops with glowing signs, a cafe where a couple laughed over a shared dessert, a bookstore with a single light in the back where someone still worked late. He turned into the park again, drawn to the quiet of the river, the water now darker, reflecting the lights of the city like scattered stars. He leaned against the railing of the small bridge, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the occasional croak of a frog, and the soft rustle of leaves. He closed his eyes and let his breathing slow. The narrator whispered, "When we make space for stillness, the mind can finally show us the doors we have been afraid to open." Samuel thought about Mara, about the way she smiled in the mornings, about the way his life had become a series of quiet repetitions, and about the dreams he had left waiting in the dark. He whispered to himself that maybe it wasn't too late. The breeze carried the words away. He walked along the path where the old man had been, the bench now empty, a few pigeons still pecking at the ground. He sat down and stayed there for a long time, the rhythm of his heartbeat and the sound of the river blending until he felt almost weightless. Eventually, he rose and made his way home, climbing the stairs with slow steps. The apartment greeted him with the faint scent of soap and the lingering warmth of the day. He changed into his softest shirt and lay down on the bed. Reaching for the green book and his notebook, he wrote one final line for the night. "Tomorrow I will try to listen even more." He closed his eyes, the narrator's voice returning one last time in the part. The act of listening to life is the first step to receiving its quiet gifts, and with each choice to notice, we plant another seed of our own prosperity. The night deepened as Samuel shifted under the blanket, the room bathed in the soft light of the street lamp filtering through the window. He listened to the faint hum of the city outside and the steady ticking of the silver watch on the bedside table. He rolled to his side and opened his eyes to see the green book resting there, as if it were waiting for him. He reached for it and held it close, then set it down gently. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, and stretched his legs under the blanket, his toes brushing the cool fabric at the edge of the bed. He could hear the soft creak of the floorboards as the building settled, the quiet whisper of the night holding him in a slow rhythm. He thought about the old man by the river, about the handwritten note, and about Mara's quiet smile. He imagined her returning home, tired but full of her own small dreams, and he wondered if maybe tomorrow he could share his. The narrator's voice entered softly. "Our lives are made of quiet decisions, each one a seed we choose to plant or leave behind. And the more we notice the small gifts of the day, the richer our soil becomes." Samuel let the words drift around him like a blanket, his breathing slow and heavy. He imagined walking by the river again, touching the railing, hearing the soft music of water moving around stone. He pictured himself feeding the pigeons with the old man, feeling patient and still. He thought of the cloud he had seen earlier, drifting across the sky without hurry, and the way the sunlight had glinted on the small puddle by the bakery. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what life is meant to feel like." The narrator returned with a longer reflection now, gentle and deliberate. When we slow down and let ourselves notice, we open the door to the quiet wealth that has always been near us. Prosperity is not only in coins and bills, it begins in the mind, in the heart that dares to believe. When you tend to your space, when you listen to the river, when you honor the food you eat and the steps you take, you are already growing the roots of abundance. Your thoughts are seeds, and every gentle thought of possibility plants another tree in the garden of your future. If you have ever doubted that you are worthy, remember this. The world reflects what you believe about yourself, and when you believe that life can be kind, when you trust that even the smallest moments hold gifts, the universe will answer with more. Samuel's breathing slowed as if he were falling into a gentle dream. The narrator continued, "Now, let this story settle into your heart. Let your mind wander in its own soft rhythm, and repeat silently, I am ready to receive. I am ready to grow. I am ready to live with quiet prosperity." With each breath, your mind accepts these words as seeds, and while you sleep, they will take root. Tomorrow, you will feel lighter, more open, more willing to. Notice the doors of abundance around you. And now I will ask you softly, are you still awake? If you are, leave a comment saying you are still here. And if your eyes are already heavy, then rest deeply because you are safe. Your dreams are ready to grow, and your quiet prosperity has already begun. But if you are awake, then let's go into another story, a new journey, where the night will carry you even further into peace. The first light of dawn spilled over the quiet fishing village, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, and Alina slowly opened her eyes to the faint cry of seagulls in the distance. She lay in the small bedroom with its wooden beams and the scent of salt drifting through the open window. She listened for a moment to the gentle waves lapping against the shore, then reached for the glass of water on the bedside table and took a slow sip, feeling the coolness travel down her throat. Beside her, Thomas was still asleep, his face half buried in the pillow, his dark hair messy from the night. Alina sat up and swung her legs over the edge of the bed, the wooden floor cool against her feet. She slid them into worn sandals and stood, stretching her arms above her head as her back popped softly. She crossed the room to the small mirror hanging on the wall and gazed at her reflection, noticing the faint lines under her eyes, the way her hair had tangled slightly. She smoothed it with her fingers before picking up a wooden comb and drawing it through her hair slowly, the strokes steady and soft. She opened the small bathroom door, the tiles cool under her steps, and splashed her face with water, watching the droplets slide down her cheeks in the dim light. The narrator's voice drifted in gently. Mornings are invitations, soft reminders that each day can be shaped differently. If we dare to notice the smallest changes. Alina dried her face with a thin towel, brushed her teeth slowly, and looked once more in the mirror. Whispering to herself, "Today will be good," she returned to the bedroom, quietly pulling a light sweater over her nightdress, and moved into the small kitchen where the smell of seaweed mixed with the faint aroma of the old wooden shelves. She filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove, listening to the soft click of a flame. She opened the window to let in more of the salty breeze and watched as the first fisherman walked down the cobblestone street, a net slung over his shoulder, his boots splashing through a shallow puddle. Thomas stirred and appeared in the doorway. Rubbing his eyes, he grumbled a sleepy good morning and sat at the table, his shoulders hunched. Alina smiled softly and poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. Sliding one toward him, he wrapped his hands around it without a word, staring at the steam rising in delicate curls. The narrator's voice returned softly. Some mornings are heavy for those who carry doubt, while others feel lighter for those who let belief rise with the sun. Alina sipped her tea slowly, the warmth spreading through her. She looked out at the ocean and felt a small spark of gratitude in her chest. Thomas broke the silence, saying he didn't see the point in walking down to the docks today. The same gray water, the same nets, the same life. Alina listened quietly, choosing not to argue, and instead said, "Maybe something new will appear if we look for it." He only shook his head. After breakfast, she laced her simple shoes and stepped outside. The stones of the street still wet from the night mist. She walked slowly, noticing the scent of the ocean, the gulls circling above, the way the morning light reflected in the puddles. She bent down and touched the surface of one, ripples forming from her fingertip. The narrator whispered again, "Noticing the world is the first act of planting quiet prosperity." Alina walked to the edge of the docks, the water shifting gently against the wood, and breathed deeply, feeling that maybe, just maybe, today could change something. Thomas eventually rose from the table, leaving his half-empty mug on the counter, and dragged himself to the small porch where the sea wind brushed his face. He squinted at the brightening sky and the gulls circling above, his mind heavy with the familiar weight of routine. Lena returned from the docks and found him sitting there with his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the boats bobbing in the distance. She set down the small basket she carried. Inside were a few seashells, a piece of smooth driftwood, and a small silver coin she had found between the stones. She held up the coin with a quiet smile and said, "Look, maybe it's a sign." Thomas frowned and said it was probably just dropped by a careless fisherman. She nodded softly, not arguing, but slipped the coin into her pocket. She walked past him into the house, the scent of salt and old wood following her. She placed the seashells on the kitchen windowsill and ran her fingers along the ridges of the driftwood. Thomas eventually joined her inside and muttered something about going to check the nets. He put on his worn boots and jacket, the leather creaking as he moved, and stepped out onto the cobblestone street, his footsteps echoing faintly in the morning air. Alina watched him go, and then decided to tidy the house. She swept the wooden floor slowly, the broom whispering against the boards. She wiped the table, washed the dishes from breakfast, and then sat by the window, letting the soft breeze carry the smell of the sea through the room. The narrator's voice returned in a low hum. "Small acts of care are quiet messages to the universe, telling it we are ready to receive." Thomas reached the shore and crouched by the nets, pulling them in slowly, his fingers raw from years of labor. The nets were heavy with seaweed and only a few wriggling fish. He muttered under his breath, "Always the same, always too little." He dragged the nets up onto the dock and sat, staring. At the horizon, he thought of the bills waiting on the kitchen shelf, of the peeling paint on the door, of the dreams he had stopped having. The wind ruffled his hair as he leaned back. Closing his eyes for a moment, Alina decided to visit the small market square in the village. She slipped into her shoes again and walked through the narrow alleys, greeting neighbors softly. She stopped by a wooden stall where a woman sold small pastries and bought two, the flaky bread warm in her hands. She ate one slowly as she walked toward the cliff overlooking the sea. The sky now brighter, a pale blue stretching over the water. The narrator whispered, "Sometimes one heart must believe enough for two, and in its quiet faith, the world begins to shift." Alina sat on the low stone wall at the cliff's edge, biting into the soft pastry and letting the crumbs fall to the ground. She closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of the ocean below. A rhythm older than worry, older than doubt. She wondered if Thomas could ever feel it the way she did. In the distance, she heard the faint tolling of a small church bell, marking the slow hour. The world felt paused, yet alive, and she smiled. Softly to herself, Thomas returned home around midday, his boots muddy from the shore, his shoulders hunched. He dropped the small catch on the counter with a sigh. Only for fish glistening in the dim kitchen light. Elena turned from the window and smiled softly. She thanked him as if he had brought her something rare and precious. He muttered that it was barely enough for dinner. She quietly began cleaning the fish, the water in the basin cold against her fingers, while Thomas sat heavily in the old wooden chair and rubbed his temples. Outside, the sky was a soft gray, clouds gathering slowly over the water. A breeze pushed the scent of salt and damp wood through the house. The narrator's voice flowed in gently. Life often waits for our hearts to soften before it opens its hidden doors. Thomas glanced at the seashells on the windowsill and the piece of driftwood on the table, frowning slightly. He asked why she kept these useless things. Elena answered, quietly, "They remind me that the world leaves gifts for those who look." He shook his head and leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams after lunch, which was quiet except for the sound of the wooden spoons against the bowls. Elena decided to take a walk along the cliffs again. Thomas followed reluctantly, hands in his jacket pockets. The path was narrow and lined with wild grass, the sea roaring softly below as they walked. Elena pointed out a small yellow flower growing between the rocks, its petals trembling in the wind. Thomas barely glanced at it, saying it would probably be gone by next week. The narrator whispered, "Those who only see endings miss the quiet miracle of beginnings." They reached the edge of the cliff and stood there in silence. The waves curling and breaking against the rocks far below. Elena closed her eyes and let the wind lift her hair. She whispered to herself, "I am ready to receive." Thomas looked at her and said nothing, but something in his chest stirred. A strange ache he couldn't name. Later that afternoon, rain began to fall in a fine mist. The cobblestones, slick and shining, they returned to the small house, and Elena lit a candle on the windowsill, the flickering light softening the shadows. She heated water for tea while Thomas dried his hair with a rough towel. Sitting by the window, he watched the rain streak down the glass, droplets racing each other to the sill. He found himself following their paths as if each had a story. The narrator returned with a quiet thought. Even the simplest motions of the world hold patterns of abundance for those who will pause to see them. Thomas exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a little, as the house filled with a gentle scent of brewing tea. The evening settled softly over the village, the rain easing into a fine drizzle that left the air smelling of wet earth and sea salt. Elena lit a small oil lamp and placed it on the wooden shelf, its glow spreading a warm golden hue across the room. Thomas sat quietly at the table, turning the small silver coin she had found earlier between his fingers. He stared at it for a long time. The metal catching the light, Elena moved slowly around the kitchen, cutting bread and spreading a thin layer of butter on each slice. The soft scrape of the knife on the crust filling the silence. She placed a slice in front of Thomas. He nodded slightly and took a slow bite, chewing as if tasting something. For the first time in days, the narrator's voice drifted in like the wind. There are moments in life when nothing seems to change, yet inside the heart, tiny doors begin to open. After dinner, Alina washed the dishes in a shallow basin of warm water, her hands moving slowly, the rhythm of the water soothing. Thomas watched her for a moment before standing and walking to the small window. Outside, the street was empty. The wet stones, reflecting the lamplight, he could see the faint shapes of fishing boats tied at the docks. Swaying gently with the tide, he exhaled through his nose and whispered to himself. "It's always the same," the narrator replied softly. "The world often feels unchanging to those who repeat their doubts." Thomas turned and saw Alina drying her hands on a soft cloth, her movements calm, almost graceful. She looked at him and said, "Tomorrow, maybe we should wake up early and walk to the lighthouse. The view will be beautiful." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe." They prepared for bed slowly, the house filled with the soft hum of the ocean outside. Thomas removed his boots and set them neatly by the wall, then sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his tired feet. Alina brushed her hair with long, slow strokes, then placed the wooden comb on the bedside table. She slipped under the covers, her body relaxing into the mattress. Thomas joined her and lay on his back, staring at the ceiling beams. The faint sound of rain tapping the window like a distant lullaby. The narrator whispered one last time before sleep. Every night is an invitation, a chance to leave behind the weight of today and allow tomorrow to arrive gently. Thomas closed his eyes, and for the first time in many weeks, he felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Something like hope. The house grew still, the ocean breathing softly beyond the walls. The morning came with a pale light creeping slowly across the wooden floor. Thomas stirred first, blinking at the beams above his head. The room cool and quiet. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and felt the chill of the floorboards under his feet. He stood slowly, stretching his stiff back, then shuffled to the small washstand where a cracked mirror leaned against the wall. He splashed his face with cold water from a ceramic bowl and looked at his reflection. His hair was a tangle and faint shadows clung under his eyes. He stared at them for a moment, then ran his fingers through his hair, trying to smooth it. Alina shifted in the bed and sat up, her voice still soft with sleep. "Good morning, Thomas." He turned and nodded, murmuring a quiet morning in reply. She rose and wrapped herself in a shawl, the color of faded lavender, and padded barefoot into the small kitchen. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove, the metal ticking softly as it heated. Thomas followed slowly, sitting at the table and watching the thin plume of steam rise. The narrator's voice returned, quiet and reflective. Sometimes the beginning of change is so small, it hides in the folds of an ordinary day. They ate breakfast in silence, just warm bread and tea, and the sound of the distant gulls outside. Afterward, Alina suggested they take the early walk to the lighthouse. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. Pulling on his worn jacket and boots, they stepped outside. The village still wrapped in a sleepy hush, the cobblestones glistening with dew. As they walked, Thomas noticed how the air felt cleaner, sharper, and how the light on the water shifted with each wave. The path to the lighthouse was steep, lined with low shrubs and scattered wildflowers. Alina pointed to a cluster of purple blooms tucked against a rock, and for the first time, Thomas crouched to look. The petals trembling in the breeze. The narrator whispered softly, "When you choose to see, even the smallest things can begin to speak of abundance." They reached the lighthouse and stood at the edge, the sea stretching endlessly. The sky a soft, endless blue. Thomas exhaled and felt the weight in his chest lift just a little. Alina closed her eyes, whispering a quiet thank you to the morning. Thomas watched her and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. A quiet, almost unspoken hope. They lingered there, the wind brushing their faces, the ocean humming its ancient song below. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the village, the scent of the sea and warm stone filling the air. Thomas and Alina walked slowly back from the lighthouse, their steps unhurried. The soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots, the only sound between them for a while. As they reached the house, Thomas paused by the door and noticed how the small seashells on the windowsill seemed to catch the light. He reached out and ran, his fingers over the smooth driftwood Alina had placed there, his touch gentle, thoughtful. Alina smiled quietly, but said nothing. Inside, the house was cool and still. They shared a simple meal. Soup simmered slowly on the stove, steam curling toward the ceiling in lazy spirals. Thomas watched the steam and thought about how even the smallest things in life rose upward if they were light enough. The narrator spoke softly. Transformation often begins, not with great leaps, but with quiet noticing. After lunch, Alina suggested they take a walk along the shore to look for more driftwood. Thomas agreed without hesitation this time, as they wandered the damp sand. The sound of the waves brushing the shore in steady rhythm. Thomas felt his chest open in a way he could not explain. He watched the foam retreat and return, leaving delicate patterns behind. And he thought of all the patterns in his own life he had never paid attention to. Alina bent down to pick up a small, smooth stone, handing it to him with a grin. He held it and felt the coolness of it, slipping it into his pocket without a word. The narrator returned with a whisper, "When we begin to treasure the small gifts of the world, the larger gifts find their way to us." The sky softened into evening, colors of pale gold and lavender bleeding into one another. Thomas and Alina returned to the house, their bodies pleasantly tired from the long walk. Thomas lit the oil lamp while Alina heated water for tea. The flame flickered and threw gentle shadows on the walls. They sat together at the table, sipping slowly, saying very little, just listening to the soft hum of the ocean outside. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a deep and quiet contentment, as if the world was no longer heavy against his shoulders. The narrator's voice floated through the quiet. Each day you choose to see differently. You are planting seeds for a life that feels lighter, richer, and more your own. Thomas leaned back in his chair, eyelids heavy, the warmth of the tea and the rhythm of the sea carrying him into a state of almost dreamlike calm that night. The house was quiet, except for the low song of the ocean and the occasional creak of the wooden beams. Thomas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling through the small window in silver ribbons. Alina was already asleep beside him, her breathing slow and peaceful. He turned onto his side and thought about the day, about the shells, the driftwood, the flowers clinging to the rocks. He felt something he had not felt in many years, a calm that came from noticing instead of resisting. The narrator's voice entered slowly, as soft as the tide. Life begins to change the moment you begin to see what is already around you. Abundance is not always gold in your hand. Sometimes it is the quiet shift in your heart that invites the gold to come. Thomas closed his eyes, listening. The voice continued, each day that you pause, breathe, and give thanks for the smallest details, you are opening invisible doors. You are whispering to life that you are ready to receive. The dreams you have held at a distance begin to draw nearer, like the tide rising to touch the shore. Now imagine, as you listen, that your home, your life, your days are filling with the light of prosperity. Imagine the weight leaving your shoulders, replaced by a warm and gentle certainty that all you need will come to you. Imagine waking each morning with a soft smile because you already feel rich in your heart, and the world responds to that feeling. Thomas shifted under the blanket, his body heavy, his mind floating in a warm haze. The narrator continued, as you drift, let these words settle into your subconscious. You are worthy of receiving. You are ready for quiet prosperity. Opportunities will find you, and you will recognize them because you have opened the space to allow them in. Breathe deeply now. Let the rhythm of the waves carry your thoughts. Let your mind rest in trust tonight. Your dreams will plant the seeds of your new life. And tomorrow, your steps will be lighter. Your eyes will see more clearly. Your heart will be open. Remember, even the smallest shift is the beginning of a greater change. Now, as you rest, I wonder, are you still awake? If you are, leave a comment and let me know that you are still here. But if your eyes are heavy and your mind is floating in dreams, then let go, because if you are awake, we can begin another story, one that will carry you even deeper into peace. But for now, just breathe and let the ocean and these words hold you gently. Asterisk. The first light of morning slipped through the narrow curtains of a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old building in the city. Michael stirred slowly under the thin blanket, his arm reaching out for the alarm clock on the small table. Beside the bed, he blinked against the pale light, his head heavy with sleep. He sat up with a slow stretch, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders, and swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet touching the cool floor. He stayed there for a moment, just breathing. Then he reached for his slippers and slid them on. The sound of the hallway traffic faint through the walls. He stood and shuffled to the bathroom, turning the faucet on and splashing cold water over his face. The chill woke him slightly. He looked into the mirror and saw the dark circles under his eyes, the slightly unshaven face, the tired man looking back at him. He picked up the toothbrush, applied the paste, and brushed slowly, his mind wandering to the tasks of the day. He rinsed his mouth, combed his hair, noticing how it stuck up in odd angles, and tried to press it down with wet fingers. He stepped back and stared at himself for a moment longer. The narrator's voice came softly. Sometimes the first step toward change is simply seeing yourself as you are, really seeing. He sighed and walked to the small kitchen, where the air still smelled faintly of the dinner from the night before. He filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, the ticking of the old gas burner filling the room. He opened the fridge and found the milk nearly gone, the bread slightly dry, He cut 2 slices anyway, dropped them into the toaster, and waited, leaning against the counter. The city hummed beyond the window. Distant car horns, the call of a vendor, footsteps on the pavement. He poured himself tea when the kettle whistled, added the last bit of milk, and sat at the small wooden table to eat in silence. Each sip and bite slow, almost mechanical. After breakfast, he opened the window to let in the morning air, feeling the soft breeze brush against his face, carrying the scent of wet pavement and something faintly floral from a neighbor's balcony. He closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply. The narrator returned in the smallest pauses. Life is whispering to you. Are you listening, Michael? Finished his tea, washed the cup and plate, and put on his worn shoes, tying the laces carefully. He picked up his old satchel from the chair and left the apartment. The hallway dim and cool. He locked the door and descended the stairs, each step echoing outside. The sun was brighter now, catching the edges of the tall buildings. He began the long walk to the bus stop, passing the bakery with its warm scent of bread, the flower shop with buckets of roses and lilies spilling color onto the sidewalk. In the closed bookstore, he always noticed, but never entered. He paused for a moment in front of its window, looking at the covers of novels and travel guides, then continued walking. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes, and he climbed aboard, taking a seat by the window. The world sliding past slowly, and somewhere inside, he felt a small stirring, almost like the beginning of hope. The bus rolled through the city streets, stopping and starting, the gentle vibration making Michael's eyelids heavy. He watched people outside hurrying along the sidewalks. A woman carrying a bag of oranges, a man walking his small dog with a red leash, a street cleaner moving slowly with his broom, the morning sun glinting off car windows. He felt a strange sense of being outside of all that rushing, as if he were floating past life instead of inside it. The bus turned onto a wide avenue lined with trees whose leaves shimmered in the light breeze. He shifted in his seat and glanced around at the other passengers. A young girl with headphones tapping her fingers on her bag, an older man reading a folded newspaper, a mother gently rocking her baby in her arms. He took a slow breath, letting the rhythm of the bus relax him. The narrator's voice came softly. Sometimes life invites you to see, to notice, to step outside of the noise and simply watch. Michael arrived at his stop and stepped down onto the pavement. The smell of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe wrapped around him as he walked. He entered the tall glass building where he worked, the lobby echoing with the footsteps of dozens of people moving quickly. He greeted the security guard with a nod, pressed the button for the elevator, and waited. His reflection stared back at him from the polished metal doors, and he noticed the faint slump of his shoulders. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. He stepped inside with a small group of strangers, all staring at their phones. The ride was silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery. He stepped out on the 9th floor, walked to his desk, and switched on the computer. The screen glowed as he shuffled through papers, checking emails, responding with short answers. His day passed slowly, the tapping of keyboards, the occasional ringing phone, the low murmur of colleagues. At lunch, he ate alone at the break room table, a simple sandwich and an apple. He watched the steam curl from the coffee machine and drift upward until it disappeared. The narrator whispered, "Even in the ordinary, There are patterns and signs waiting to be noticed after work. Michael decided to walk home instead of taking the bus. The evening light was soft, the air cooler now. He passed the park and stopped to watch the fountain, the water catching the last rays of the sun like fragments of glass. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing across the grass. He sat on a bench for a moment, just breathing, letting his mind drift. Then he rose and continued his walk home. When he arrived, the apartment was quiet. He set his satchel down, took off his shoes, and changed into softer clothes. He stood by the window, watching the sky turn lavender and pink, and for the first time in a long while, he whispered to himself, "Maybe things can be different." The narrator's voice floated like a soft breeze. Change often begins as a whisper, the smallest acknowledgement that life could be more than it is. Right now, that night, Michael prepared a simple dinner, boiling pasta and adding a small drizzle of olive oil. He ate slowly at a small wooden table. The only sound, the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. He washed the plate and cup, the warm water making his fingers pruny, and dried them with a soft towel. Afterward, he wandered into the living room, sat on the old couch, and stared at the bookshelf he had not touched in months. Dust lined the edges of the shelves. He reached for a book at random and opened it. The pages had a faint, comforting smell of paper and time. He read a few lines, but his mind drifted, his eyes growing heavy. The narrator's voice entered like a low whisper. Sometimes the mind resists stillness because it is not used to being heard. He closed the book and leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The window was slightly open, and a cool breeze brushed against his face, carrying the scent of rain. That was beginning to fall in the distance. He stood and walked to the window, watching the first drops land on the glass. Small rivers forming and sliding down, the city lights blurred behind them. He stayed there for a while, simply watching, feeling his chest rise and fall. After a while, he went to the bathroom, brushed his teeth slowly, washed his face, and noticed. Again, the man in the mirror, maybe a little softer around the eyes tonight. He changed into his loose shirt and lay in bed, adjusting the blanket around his legs. The sound of distant rain on the roof and windows filling the silence. He let himself drift, his breathing slow, and the narrator returned. Every quiet act of noticing, every pause where you simply are without rushing, is planting a seed of abundance. The more you allow life to slow, the more space you create for the things you seek to enter. Michael's mind floated between thoughts and dreams, images of water and light, the echo of footsteps in the rain, and a soft feeling that something, somewhere, was shifting. The rain tapped steadily through the night, like a lullaby, and he fell asleep without even realizing. The next morning, Michael awoke to the soft gray light of a cloudy sky. The air in his room was cooler than usual. He stretched slowly, his arms reaching above his head, and let out a long sigh. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the chill of the floor under his bare feet. He slid on his slippers and shuffled toward the bathroom. He turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over his hands before splashing his face. The shock made him inhale sharply. He leaned on the sink and studied his reflection. The faint stubble on his jaw, the lines around his eyes, the way the early light made him look softer. He brushed his teeth carefully, rinsed his mouth, and ran a comb through his hair, watching it fall into place little by little, The narrator's voice drifted gently. Life meets you where you are, not where you pretend to be. He walked to the small kitchen, the floor creaking slightly under his steps. He boiled water for tea, the gentle whistle of the kettle filling the quiet room. He toasted bread and spread a thin layer of jam, sitting at the table to eat while staring at the window. Outside, raindrops clung to the branches of a tree, trembling in the soft wind. He chewed slowly, savoring the simplicity of the moment. After breakfast, he decided to take a slower route to work, leaving the apartment with his satchel over his shoulder. He walked past the familiar bakery and nodded to the woman arranging loaves in the window. He crossed the street and wandered through the small park, wet leaves sticking to his shoes, the scent of damp earth rising all around him. He paused by the pond, where a single duck floated in lazy circles, ripples moving outward like quiet waves. He stood there for a while, just breathing. The narrator spoke softly. The world is always speaking, but you can only hear it when you move slowly enough. Eventually, Michael continued walking, his pace unhurried. Arriving at the office calmer than usual, he spent the day moving through the motions, typing, answering emails, standing by the window occasionally to watch the shifting clouds, and when evening came, he walked home again. Choosing the longer path, he stopped at a small grocery store. Picking up fresh bread, milk, and a few apples, he carried the bag home, the handles cutting slightly into his fingers, the sky turning gold as the sun set behind the buildings. Once inside, he unpacked the groceries and prepared a warm meal. He lit a small candle on the table, the flickering light making the room feel softer. He ate in silence, tasting every bite, feeling present in every movement. After dinner, he washed the dishes, dried his hands, and walked to the window. The city lights sparkled against the night sky. He leaned against the frame and whispered, "Maybe life is changing." The narrator's voice returned like a quiet friend. Change is often a series of small, almost invisible choices, repeated until the new life becomes your own the following day. Michael woke up before the alarm, the soft blue of early dawn creeping through the thin curtains. He lay in bed for a while, listening to the distant hum of the city slowly awakening, the sound of a car passing on the wet street, the faint whistle of the wind through the trees. He finally sat up, rubbed his eyes, and yawned, swinging his legs out of bed and feeling the slight ache in his calves. He slipped into his slippers and walked slowly to the kitchen. He filled the kettle and placed it on the stove, the click of the gas and the low flame whispering beneath it. He leaned against the counter and looked at the quiet apartment, noticing the small details he used to ignore, a tiny crack near the ceiling, the way the light made a soft pattern on the floor. He prepared a simple breakfast, eggs and toast, and sat down to eat, chewing slowly, the taste familiar and comforting. The narrator's voice drifted in softly. When you take time to notice the small things, life feels fuller, even when nothing has changed. After breakfast, he showered, letting the warm water run over his shoulders, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. He dressed carefully, choosing a light sweater and his usual dark pants. He combed his hair in front of the mirror and noticed the way the light reflected in his eyes. He left the apartment and took the bus again, this time sitting by the window. He watched the streets roll by, people rushing, umbrellas opening and closing, the city alive in its quiet rhythm. He felt as if he were moving slower than the world. And yet, that slowness felt like a gift. At work, he moved through the tasks as usual, but with small pauses, a sip of water, a deep breath, a glance out the window at the shifting clouds. During lunch, he sat outside on a bench, even though it was chilly. He watched pigeons hop near his feet and a few leaves skitter across the ground. The narrator whispered, "Your mind becomes lighter when you stop resisting the pace of life and simply walk with it." After work, Michael decided to visit a small bookstore he passed often but never entered. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper and polished wood. He wandered through the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of books. Pausing to read a line or two, he found an old journal, the cover plain and brown, and decided to buy it. Walking home with the small bag in hand felt like carrying a quiet promise. At home, he made tea and sat at the table. Opening the journal, he held the pen for a moment, unsure of what to write, and then he simply wrote about his day. Each small detail, the bus, the breakfast, the bookstore, the sky, he wrote slowly, as if each word was a breath. The narrator's voice came gently. Writing is a way of listening to yourself, of telling life you are paying attention. He closed the journal, feeling lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. He turned off the light and went to bed early. The sound of the wind outside lulling him into a soft, dreamlike state. The next morning, Michael awoke with the pale light of the sun filtering softly through the curtains. He stayed in bed for a few extra moments, his body sinking into the mattress, feeling the quiet of the room. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood, and the soft hum of a passing car. He finally swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his feet finding the slippers, and he walked slowly to the bathroom. Splashing his face with cool water, feeling the freshness wake him fully, he brushed his teeth in slow circles, watching himself in the mirror, noticing the calm that had started to live in his eyes. He dried his face with a soft towel and moved to the kitchen, where he filled the kettle and set it to boil. The low whistle blending with the morning silence. He cracked an egg into a pan, the soft sizzle breaking the stillness. He ate slowly at the table, staring out the window at the faint morning mist. The narrator's voice drifted in softly. Peace is not something that arrives all at once. It is built in moments like these, one quiet breath at a time. After breakfast, he dressed in comfortable clothes, a light sweater and worn jeans, and decided to take a walk. He stepped out into the cool air, feeling the breeze touch his face. The streets were almost empty, wet from the night's rain. He walked to the park and followed the narrow path, leaves sticking lightly to his shoes, the smell of damp earth rising around him. He paused by the bench near the pond and sat down, watching the water ripple softly with the wind. A single bird dipped low and skimmed the surface, leaving a faint trail. He watched for a long time, barely moving. The narrator whispered, "The world is full of abundance, but only the still heart can see it." He closed his eyes and listened to the rustling leaves, the distant hum of the city, the quiet splash of the pond. After some time, he stood and continued walking, feeling lighter with every step. He passed by a small flower shop and bought a single white lily. The florist wrapped it gently in paper, and he carried it home carefully, placing it in a glass of water by the window. The room seemed brighter. With the simple presence of the flower, he made tea and sat with his journal, writing about the walk, the pond, the flower, the small moments that made the day feel alive. As he wrote, he felt a soft warmth in his chest, a sense of quiet gratitude. The narrator returned. Gratitude opens doors to things you cannot yet see, and with every gentle thought, you invite new possibilities into your life. That night, he cooked a small dinner, lit the candle again, and ate slowly, noticing the way the flame flickered and the shadows danced on the wall. He washed the dishes, dried his hands, and sat by the window to watch the sky fade into evening. The lights of the city glowing like stars on the ground. He breathed deeply, letting the calm settle over him like a blanket. He went to bed early, curling under the covers, the faint scent of the lily nearby, and drifted into a soft, dreamlike sleep as the world outside moved quietly through the night. That night, Michael woke briefly, the room dark except for the soft glow of the city through the window. He lay in bed, listening to the quiet, his breathing steady, the faint ticking of the clock marking time gently. He rolled onto his side and stared at the faint outline of the lily in the glass by the window, its white petals catching a fragment of moonlight. He thought about the last few days, the way he had slowed down, the way he had noticed the world, the small shifts that had begun to change the way his life felt. He closed his eyes again and let the thoughts drift. The narrator's voice entered softly, almost like a whisper in the corner of the mind. Every life has its own rhythm, and when you listen, when you slow down enough to feel it, prosperity can arrive in ways that are gentle and unexpected. Michael dreamed of walking through a field of tall golden grass, the sun warm on his face, his hands brushing against the stalks, a soft wind carrying the scent of flowers. He felt free, unburdened, light. The dream lingered even as he stirred in his sleep. The night passing slowly and softly. When morning came, he rose with calm, moving through the motions of the day, brushing his teeth, rinsing his face, dressing slowly, each movement deliberate. He made breakfast, ate quietly, wrote in his journal, and felt that subtle sense of abundance settle deeper into his chest. The narrator returned. Your mind is like a garden, and every thought you choose to plant will grow. If you plant fear, it will rise. If you plant gratitude, it will bloom. And if you plant the quiet belief that you are worthy of a prosperous life, that belief will take root in places you cannot yet see. The voice softened even more. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, let these words move through your mind like a gentle stream. I am safe. I am enough. I am open to receive abundance. I am grateful for the small things. I trust that my life is unfolding in ways that will bless me. The words repeated like a rhythm, slow and steady. I am safe. I am enough. I am open to receive abundance. I am grateful for the small things. I trust that my life is unfolding in ways that will bless me. The voice lingered. Your subconscious is listening, and it will remember long after you have drifted into dreams. Feel your body sinking into the bed. Feel your breathing slow. Allow the weight of the day to fall away. Imagine yourself walking through that golden field again, the sun warm, the breeze soft, and everything in your life quietly aligning for you're good. The narrator's voice became even gentler. If you are still awake, if your eyes are still open, or your mind is still listening, Leave a comment that says, "I am still awake," and let the world know you made it to this moment. But if you are awake, we can go even further, because there is always another story waiting. And if you are ready, we can step into it together. Let your breathing guide you. Let your thoughts drift, and let the journey continue. Eleanor lived in a small wooden house at the edge of a quiet countryside village, the kind of house with creaking floors, old floral curtains, and the soft scent of lavender lingering in every corner. She was 73, and her days moved slowly now, but on this morning she woke up with a sense of anticipation because her granddaughter Lily was visiting for the weekend. The sun had barely begun to rise when Eleanor opened her eyes. She lay for a moment, listening to the faint song of birds outside her window. Then she slowly sat up, placed her feet into her soft wool slippers, and reached for her robe draped over the chair. She shuffled to the window, drew the curtain open, and let the early golden light spill into the room, illuminating the dust particles that danced gently in the air. She smiled quietly and whispered a small thank you to the morning. The narrator's voice floated softly. Gratitude for the simple moments is the soil in which abundance grows. Eleanor moved to the small wooden wardrobe and chose a cozy cardigan, then walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and let the cold water run over her hands before splashing her face. She looked in the mirror and saw the fine lines of age and the soft circles under her eyes. She smiled at herself anyway, brushing her gray hair slowly with long, gentle strokes. She brushed her teeth carefully and hummed a soft tune, the sound echoing lightly in the quiet house in the guest room. Lily stirred, her small hand peeking out from under the blanket. Eleanor tiptoed in and whispered, "Good morning, sweetheart," and Lily opened her sleepy eyes. Rubbing them with tiny fists, she yawned and smiled, her hair sticking up in funny little tufts. Eleanor helped her sit up, and together they walked to the kitchen, the wooden floor creaking under their slow steps. Eleanor lifted Lily into a chair at the table and began preparing oatmeal, pouring oats into a small pot, adding water, and stirring with a wooden spoon. Lily leaned her chin on her hands, watching her grandmother's every move. The room smelled of warm grain and honey. Eleanor placed a small bowl in front of Lily, drizzled a swirl of honey on top, and handed her a spoon. They ate quietly. The only sounds, the soft clink of spoons and the occasional bird outside. The narrator whispered again, "When you slow down to see the beauty in these little rituals, you remind your heart that life is already full, that prosperity begins as a feeling long before it arrives as a thing you can touch." After breakfast, Eleanor took Lily by the hand and said, "Let's feed the chickens." They pulled on their boots and stepped into the soft morning air, damp with dew, the grass cool against their ankles. The old chicken coop stood by the garden, and the hens clucked softly as Eleanor scattered grain. Lily giggled as the chickens pecked eagerly. The sky grew brighter, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and wildflowers. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter and thought about how life's richest moments were always quiet, slow, and full of love. And she whispered another thank you to herself as the day truly began after feeding the chickens. Eleanor and Lily walked slowly along the garden path, the soft crunch of gravel under their boots blending with the distant hum of bees. The vegetable patch was glistening with dew, each leaf holding tiny droplets that caught the sunlight like little jewels. Lily crouched down to touch a lettuce leaf, and Eleanor smiled, saying softly, "Do you see how even the smallest things shine when the sun finds them?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. The narrator spoke gently. Noticing beauty in small moments is the first step to feeling truly abundant. Eleanor led her to the row of sunflowers, their tall heads nodding lazily in the breeze, and she plucked one loose petal that had fallen to the soil, handing it to Lily, who twirled it between her fingers as if it were a treasure. After their walk, they returned to the house, where Eleanor filled a small basin with warm water and set it on the wooden table. She rolled up her sleeves and began to wash the few vegetables they had picked: tomatoes, a small cucumber, and some fragrant herbs. Lily climbed onto a chair to watch, her feet dangling in the air. Eleanor spoke softly about how planting seeds and caring for them patiently brings food, and how life worked the same way with dreams. The narrator murmured, "Prosperity often starts like a seed, unseen, tender, and growing only because you care for it." After the vegetables were washed, Eleanor decided it was time to bake bread. She took a worn wooden bowl, poured flour into it, added water and a pinch of salt, and began kneading slowly, her hands moving with the rhythm of years of practice. Lily sprinkled a bit of flour on the table and giggled as it puffed into the air like snow. Eleanor showed her how to press and fold the dough, their hands working side by side, and the kitchen soon filled with a soft smell of yeast. They set the dough aside to rise under a clean cloth and sat on a small porch with mugs of warm tea. The distant sea shimmered beyond the hills, and a single bird soared lazily across the sky. Lily leaned against her grandmother and asked, "Grandma, why do you always smile when you look at the sky?" Eleanor chuckled and said, "Because it reminds me that there is always enough space for our hopes to grow." The narrator's voice returned, "When you believe there is space for your dreams, life begins to rearrange itself to make room for them." They sat quietly, letting the sun warm their faces, until the smell of baking bread reached the porch, warm and rich. Eleanor rose slowly, joints creaking a little, and went to check the oven. She opened the door, letting a wave of golden heat and sweet aroma fill the room, and pulled out a loaf, perfectly browned. Lily clapped her hands in delight. They waited for it to cool slightly, then sliced it, butter melting on the warm bread, and ate together, savoring each bite as if it were the most special meal in the world. The morning drifted into early afternoon. The rhythm of their day, unhurried, soft, and full of hidden abundance, sat after lunch. Eleanor suggested that they take a walk down the old path that led to the stream. She packed a small basket with 2 slices of the freshly baked bread wrapped in a cloth, a jar of honey, and a small thermos of tea. Lily put on her little straw hat while Eleanor tied a soft scarf around her neck. They stepped out into the gentle afternoon light, the sun now higher and warmer, painting long shadows across the grass. The path was narrow and lined with wildflowers, tiny white daisies and bright yellow buttercups swaying with the wind. Lily reached out to pick one, and Eleanor reminded her softly, "The flowers are happiest when we let them live where they are." And Lily nodded, holding her hands behind her back. The narrator spoke quietly, learning to appreciate what exists without needing to own it is one of the quiet secrets of a prosperous heart. They passed a wooden fence where an old horse grazed lazily, its brown coat shining in the sun. Lily waved at it, and the horse flicked its tail. Unbothered and content, Eleanor thought to herself how nature never rushed, yet everything it needed always arrived in time. They finally reached the stream, a thin ribbon of water winding through rocks and moss. The sound of it was soft and comforting. Lily crouched down and splashed her hands in the cool water, giggling at the way droplets glittered like tiny diamonds. Eleanor spread a small blanket on the grass, and they sat together, the air full of the scent of earth and leaves. She opened the basket and gave Lily a slice of bread with honey. The sticky sweetness made the little girl laugh as it dripped on her fingers. Eleanor licked a bit from Lily's hand, and they both laughed. The narrator's voice returned gently. Joy is often found in the simplest gestures, and when you fill your moments with joy, you invite life to give you more to be joyful about. After they ate, Eleanor leaned back on her elbows and looked at the clouds, pointing out shapes for Lily to see. A rabbit, a boat, and even a heart. Lily's imagination ran wild, and she began to make up small stories about the clouds traveling to faraway lands. Eleanor listened, feeling her own heart lighten. The slow hours at the stream passed as they dipped their toes in the water, watched tiny fish swim by, and collected a few smooth stones that felt cool and heavy in their hands before leaving. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a small thought. May this day plant happiness in her heart, the narrator added softly. The thoughts you release with love often return to you multiplied. And as the afternoon began to turn golden, they started the walk back home. Hand in hand, the world around them glowing in a quiet, abundant peace. As they returned home, the golden afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground. The air was warmer now and carried the faint smell of pine and soil. Eleanor's steps were steady but slow, and Lily matched her pace, holding tightly to her hand. When they reached the small gate, Eleanor paused to let Lily open it, the little girl struggling for a moment with the latch before it clicked open. And Eleanor smiled, saying softly, "Every small effort makes you stronger." Lily's face lit up with pride. The narrator whispered gently, "Celebrating small victories plants the seeds for greater successes." Once inside the garden, Eleanor led Lily to the back of the house where the wooden shed stood, weathered by years of rain and sun. She opened the door, and the scent of old wood, earth, and dried herbs filled the air. Inside were shelves lined with jars of seeds, tools with worn handles, and baskets neatly stacked. Eleanor picked a small pot and a handful of flower seeds, handing them to Lily. "Today, we plant something new," she said. Lily's eyes sparkled as she followed her grandmother to a patch of soft soil. Eleanor knelt carefully and showed her how to dig a small hole with her fingers. Feeling the earth cool and slightly damp, they dropped the seeds in gently and covered them with soil. Then Eleanor gave Lily a small watering can to sprinkle over the spot. The water darkened the earth and glimmered in the sunlight. Lily asked, "How long until it grows?" "Grandma," and Eleanor answered, "With patience, care, and faith, everything grows." The narrator's voice floated softly. Life responds to the care and belief you give it, and abundance blooms when you nurture it with love. After planting, Eleanor stood and and brushed the dirt from her hands, feeling a quiet satisfaction. They went inside as the air grew cooler, and Eleanor lit a single candle on the kitchen table. Its flame flickering gently, she began preparing a light evening meal, slicing cheese and apples while Lily arranged the pieces clumsily on a wooden plate. They sat together and ate in a soft silence, the quiet broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets outside. Eleanor felt the calm of a day well lived. The narrator spoke again. Gratitude turns ordinary days into golden ones, and when you recognize the gifts in front of you, you open the door for more to come. After dinner, they washed the simple dishes, the water warm on their hands, and Eleanor hummed a tune her own grandmother had once sung to her. Lily tried to hum along, giggling when she got the melody wrong. Night began to settle over the house, shadows growing deeper, and Eleanor took Lily to the living room where a small oil lamp glowed warmly. They sat in the rocking chair together, Lily on her lap, Eleanor's hand gently stroking her hair. Outside, the world was wrapped in quiet, and inside, it felt as though time had slowed. Just for them, the evening deepened as Eleanor rocked gently in the old chair, the wood creaking softly in a rhythm that seemed to match the sound of Lily's slow breathing. The little girl's eyes grew heavy, half closed, her head resting against her grandmother's chest. Eleanor could feel the warmth and gentle weight of her small body. She hummed quietly, a tune like a whisper floating in the air. Outside the window, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky, and a single firefly blinked near the glass, catching Lily's sleepy attention for a moment before her eyes closed again. Eleanor spoke softly, almost to herself. Every day carries its own little treasures, and if we notice them, we carry them in our hearts forever. The narrator appeared like a calm thought. The mind that finds treasure in small moments soon discovers that life offers treasures everywhere. Eleanor felt the house embracing them in its stillness, the scent of old wood, candle wax, and distant flowers filling the air. After a while, she stood carefully, carrying Lily to the bedroom. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the lamp, and their shadows stretched long against the walls. She laid Lily on the bed, her little limbs curling naturally into comfort. Eleanor removed the tiny shoes, tucked a soft quilt around her, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She whispered, "Sleep well, my love. May your dreams be sweet and full of light." Then Eleanor returned to the living room, moving slowly, as though the quiet of the night had seeped into her bones. She lit another small candle and sat at the table, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden surface. She thought of the seeds they planted today, and how tomorrow she would check if the soil had drunk the water well. The narrator spoke again, gently, like a breeze. Nurturing your dreams is just like planting seeds. You may not see them grow immediately, but your faith and care bring them to life. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the stillness sink into her chest. She rose and walked to the small back porch where the night air was cooler, carrying the earthy scent of the garden. Above her, the sky was wide and full of stars, some bright, some faint, but all of them patient in their distant glow. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and simply stood there, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Her thoughts wandered like clouds, and for a moment she imagined the little flowers and vegetables she had grown over the years. how each had started as nothing more than a silent seed in her palm, and she smiled, knowing life's quiet magic never fails those who believe in it. The night had fully embraced the little house now. The darkness outside felt like a soft blanket wrapped around the garden and the trees, and the faint glow of the candle on the table made the kitchen look golden and warm. Eleanor moved slowly, as if every motion was part of a gentle dance with time. She poured herself a cup of warm milk, the steam curling upward in delicate ribbons. She held it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. She took small sips, each one like a tiny pause, and listened to the distant chorus of crickets and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The narrator entered softly, just as a thought might drift into your mind before sleep. Life is always whispering to us, reminding us that the things we care for, water and love, eventually bloom in ways we may not yet see. Eleanor finished her milk and rinsed the cup carefully, placing it upside down on the wooden counter. She then walked to the small sitting room and picked up her old notebook, the one with a faded blue cover. She opened it slowly, the pages filled with years of handwriting, recipes, planting notes, and thoughts written on quiet nights just like this. She turned to a blank page and began writing with her delicate script. Today I planted hope with Lily, and hope always grows. She paused for a moment, tapping the pen gently, then wrote, "The seeds in the earth and the seeds in the heart need the same things: patience, care, and belief." She closed the notebook and placed it beside the lamp, then leaned back in the rocking chair once more, her body sinking into the familiar curves of the old wood. She closed her eyes and imagined the seeds sprouting beneath the soil. Unseen but alive, the narrator whispered gently, "When you believe in the unseen, you invite prosperity to move quietly toward you." Even as you rest, the house was still. The only sound the slow creak of the chair and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Eleanor drifted in and out of small dreams, seeing gardens that stretched into endless green fields, flowers opening in the sunlight, and streams of clear water flowing softly through them. And with each image, she felt a deep peace fill her chest. She thought of Lily's small hand holding hers, the way her eyes had sparkled when she planted the seeds, and she felt gratitude rise in her heart like a gentle tide. Gratitude for the day, for the earth, for love, and for the quiet abundance life always offered to those who were willing to see it. The narrator lingered like a breath. Gratitude turns the smallest house into a palace, and a quiet heart into a magnet for all good things. Eleanor whispered a soft good night to the empty room, though in her heart she knew the room was full of memories, full of unseen growth, full of the silent hum of life moving forward in its own time. The house was quiet. The stars outside shimmered like patient lanterns in the sky, and Eleanor slowly rose from the rocking chair, her body moving with the slow grace of someone at peace. She walked softly to Lily's room to check on her. The little girl slept soundly, her small chest rising and falling under the blanket. One hand curled against her cheek. Eleanor brushed a fingertip along her hair and smiled, feeling her heart expand with love. She whispered a promise to always teach her to see the beauty in small things. Then she returned to the living room, blew out the last candle, and let the moonlight fill the space with a silvery glow. She settled once more in the rocking chair, closing her eyes, and in that deep quiet, the narrator's voice returned, soft and slow, like the night itself. Sometimes life seems simple and empty, like a room with only shadows, but when you pay attention, you discover that each quiet moment holds a treasure. Every breath, every soft breeze, every heartbeat is a sign that life wants to give you more as you drift in this calm. I invite you to imagine your own seeds of prosperity planted gently in the soil of your mind. Picture them resting there, safe, nurtured, and ready to grow. Feel how each moment of gratitude waters those seeds, and every time you believe in the good that is coming, sunlight touches them and makes them stronger. With every breath you take, your life aligns with abundance, even if it moves slowly. Even if it is unseen, it is yours, and it is growing for you. Let the whisper of the leaves outside remind you that you are connected to a larger world that always finds a way to bloom again after winter. You are safe, you are cared for, and everything you need is quietly making its way toward you. The narrator paused, as if leaning closer in your thoughts. If you are still awake, leave a little comment saying you are still here, because this quiet moment belongs to you. And if your eyes are already heavy and your mind drifts into soft dreams, then simply rest, knowing that your seeds of prosperity are already planted, and tomorrow life will begin to show you their first sprouts. And if you are still with me, still awake, then let us go to another story together, a new journey waiting just beyond the next gentle breath, ready to carry you even deeper into peace and abundance. The morning sun rose slowly over the ancient city of Jerusalem, its light spilling gently across the stone walls of the palace, warming the courtyards where the soft cooing of doves echoed, and in the upper chamber of the palace, King Solomon stirred from his sleep, his eyes opening to the soft golden light that fell across the carved ceiling beams. He sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the silk blankets slide from his shoulders. He reached for his sandals, sliding his feet into the cool leather, and stood with deliberate slowness. He walked to the bronze basin by the window and dipped his hands in the cool water, splashing his face and letting droplets roll down his beard. As he looked into the polished bronze mirror, he saw his own reflection, the lines of wisdom in his eyes, the quiet strength in his gaze. And the narrator entered softly, like a thought drifting between breaths. Every morning is a chance to see the reflection of who you are becoming, to plant the thoughts that will bloom into wealth, peace, and wisdom. Solomon breathed deeply and began his morning, walking barefoot across the smooth stone floor to the balcony. He looked over the city, where merchants were already beginning to open their stalls, and the smell of bread baking in clay ovens drifted in the air. He listened to the gentle hum of life beginning and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. He thanked God for another day, for the wisdom given to him, and for the kingdom entrusted to his hands. Then he walked to his writing table, unrolled a scroll, and wrote a single sentence in precise Hebrew letters, a reminder to himself. The heart that trusts receives more than it asks for. He set the scroll aside, then called for a simple breakfast of figs, dates, and honey, eating slowly, savoring each taste. As the light shifted from soft gold to the brighter white of full morning, and the narrator returned quietly. What you feed your mind in the morning is as important as what you feed your body. Thoughts of gratitude, of patience, of trust in the abundance of life. These are the first seeds of the day. The palace began to stir as servants moved quietly, preparing for the day's council. But Solomon sat in stillness for a few moments longer, allowing the sense of quiet wealth to settle. In his chest, not the wealth of gold, though he had it, but the wealth of certainty that all things come in their time, that belief and alignment with divine order open invisible doors. He rose and began walking toward the great hall, each footstep soft against the rugs, passing carved wooden doors, and walls adorned with tapestries showing gardens, rivers, and the endless sky. And in that quiet walk, he felt the truth that every step he took in faith was another stone laid on the path to greater prosperity. The palace doors opened to the warm breeze of the late morning, and King Solomon stepped into the great hall, the polished floor reflecting the sunlight that streamed through the high windows. His advisors were already waiting in silence, standing by the long cedar table, their scrolls and tablets ready. Solomon walked with calm and authority, his robes whispering against the stone, and he took his seat on the throne of carved ivory, inlaid with gold. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the fountain at the far end, the gentle trickle of water filling the space like a breath of peace. He listened as the first matters of the day were presented, disputes over land, trade routes, and shipments of spices from distant lands. He nodded slowly, his mind clear and focused, and the narrator entered like a soft wind. True wealth is not rushed. It listens, it observes, and it decides with clarity. Solomon's voice was calm when he spoke, his solutions simple yet wise, guiding each matter with fairness, knowing that justice itself is a seed of prosperity for an entire kingdom. As the morning passed, merchants from Tyre and Sheba arrived, bearing gifts of gold, cedar wood, and rare stones. Solomon walked among the treasures slowly, touching the smooth surface of a polished gem, admiring the intricate carving of a golden cup. But he smiled, not because of the objects, but because he understood that all wealth is a reflection of inner alignment. He thanked the merchants warmly and blessed their journeys, then dismissed the court for a moment of quiet. Walking through the palace gardens, the air was fragrant with pomegranates and lilies, and the hum of bees surrounded him like a soft hymn. He touched the leaves of the olive trees and whispered a prayer, asking for guidance and for the prosperity of his people. The narrator returned, soft and steady. Imagine now that your own life is like this garden. Each thought you think a seed, each word you speak a drop of water, each act of faith a ray of sunlight, and in time, your garden grows full and abundant. Solomon found a shaded bench beneath a fig tree and closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun reach his skin and the cool shadow dance across his face. He remembered the night when he had asked God, not for riches, but for wisdom. And he felt again the quiet answer in his heart, that wisdom would bring everything else in its time. He opened his eyes and watched a bird hop along the stone path, free and unbothered, a simple reminder that life always provides for those who trust. He rose slowly and began his walk back to the hall, where the afternoon council awaited, his steps unhurried, because he carried in his mind the certainty that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. And with that certainty, every step was already a step toward abundance. The afternoon sun stretched long rays across the palace walls as King Solomon returned to the great hall. The air was warm and still, carrying the faint scent of incense from the morning prayers. He moved with measured steps toward the council table, where scribes and emissaries from distant lands awaited, each bearing news of trade, alliances, and treasures. Solomon listened quietly as a merchant from Ophir spoke of ships arriving heavy with gold and rare sandalwood. His voice steady and respectful, the king nodded and asked a few precise questions, his eyes calm and observant, and the narrator drifted softly into the moment. Wealth listens before it speaks. Abundance flows to the one who knows the rhythm of patience. Solomon rose from the throne and walked to the balcony overlooking the city. He could see the market below. Colorful tents swaying in the breeze, merchants arranging goods, and people moving like a slow river. Life flowing naturally. He breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of the city as if it were part of him. He turned back to the room and gave instructions. A portion of the new gold would be used to expand the temple, another to strengthen the storehouses, and another to ensure that widows and travelers in the city had food and shelter. For he knew that generosity was a key that opened unseen doors of blessing. The narrating voice returned, soft, as if speaking to the listener's own heart. Every act of kindness you give, every moment of faith you hold, returns to you multiplied, like waves upon waves. And in this quiet knowing, you aligned yourself with the flow of prosperity. The council continued. Matters of law and trade discussed with clarity, and as the hours passed, the light shifted to a gentle golden tone. Solomon dismissed the court and walked alone through the long corridor toward his private chamber, his fingers tracing the carved wood of the walls, each pattern telling a story of patience and craftsmanship. He entered the quiet room where a harp rested against the window, and he plucked a single note, letting the sound ring through the space. He smiled faintly, remembering his father David and the songs he had sung under the stars. The narrator whispered again, "The music of your life begins in silence. In the small moments where you choose trust over fear, faith over doubt, and gratitude over complaint." Solomon took off his crown and placed it gently on the table, feeling the weight leave his head but remain in his heart, for true kingship was not in the gold, but in the steady mind and the open soul. He sat in silence, allowing the sun to lower and the shadows to stretch long. Each moment a reminder that time itself bows to those who walk in harmony with life's flow. As evening approached and the last traces of golden light painted the palace walls, King Solomon rose from his chair and walked slowly to the balcony. The soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the distant hum of the marketplace closing. For the day, he leaned on the cool stone railing, watching the sun dip behind the hills of Jerusalem, the sky shifting from orange to deep blue. And for a moment, he said nothing, only breathing, only feeling the weight of day become lighter as the night began its gentle embrace. The narrator entered softly. Night reminds us that all things rest, that the seeds of wealth grow silently in the dark, and your heart, calm and grateful, is the richest soil of all. Solomon turned and walked down the quiet hall to the dining chamber, where a simple meal awaited: roasted lamb, figs, honey, and fresh bread. He ate slowly, chewing with intention, letting each bite remind him of the abundance in the simplest things. He thought of the farmers who grew the wheat, the shepherds who cared for the lambs, the servants who prepared the table, and he whispered a quiet blessing for each of them. Then he rose, washing his hands in a silver basin, and moved to the inner courtyard where torches flickered against the night sky. The fountain's sound echoed softly, almost like a lullaby. The moon rose above the temple roofs, bathing the stones in silver light. Solomon walked to the edge of the fountain and let his fingers trail in the cool water, ripples spreading out like the choices of a life lived with purpose. The narrator returned. Every thought you have is a ripple. Every word you speak travels far, and when your mind is filled with gratitude and quiet faith, the ripples of your life return to you as waves of blessing. He walked back toward his private study, the chamber lit by a single oil lamp, shadows dancing on the walls, and he opened a scroll of ancient wisdom, reading slowly, pausing often, letting the words sink deep into his mind. He thought of how knowledge was like treasure, invisible to the eyes, but powerful enough to shape empires. Outside, the crickets sang, and the city settled into stillness. Solomon closed his eyes for a moment, not yet to sleep, but to let the calmness of the night wash over him like an invisible river. He smiled gently to himself, knowing that the wealth of his kingdom was not only in gold or land, but in this deep alignment, this quiet flow between his heart, his actions, and the divine. The night deepened over Jerusalem, and the palace corridors grew quiet, except for the soft footsteps of the guards patrolling with their oil lamps. King Solomon walked into his inner chamber where the air was cooler and smelled faintly of cedar wood. He removed his sandals and let his feet feel the smooth stone floor. He loosened his robe and stood before the large, polished bronze mirror, observing his face illuminated by the flickering light. He saw the lines of thought around his eyes and the trace of weariness from a day of decisions. Yet he also saw the steady glow of someone who walked in the rhythm of purpose. The narrator spoke softly. When you see yourself, see not just your reflection, but your story. See the strength you have gained, the lessons you have learned, and the wealth already forming around you. Solomon moved to the low wooden bench near the window where the moonlight spilled in silver lines. He picked up a small harp and let his fingers pluck a gentle melody. The notes floated into the quiet night, blending with the sound of the wind through the trees. He closed his eyes and hummed a verse of praise, letting the words drift into the air like a prayer carried on invisible wings. After a long moment, he set the harp aside and lay on a thick rug, gazing at the carved ceiling above him. His thoughts wandered to the ships sailing under the stars, carrying goods that would soon fill his storehouses, and to the farmers who tended their vineyards, each life a part of the great circle of abundance. The narrator's voice flowed like a lullaby. Wealth is not rushed. It moves toward those who are ready, toward hearts steady with trust and minds calm enough to listen. Outside, the crickets continued their song, and Solomon rose once more to light a single candle on the altar in the corner of the room. He whispered a prayer of gratitude for the day and for the unseen blessings still on their way. Then he lay on his bed, letting the soft linen cool his skin, breathing deeply, slowly, like the night itself was teaching him the art of patience. His eyelids grew heavier, but his mind was at peace, knowing that, in stillness, true prosperity gathers like morning dew. As Solomon drifted into sleep, the palace fell into complete stillness, and the world outside became a soft whisper of wind and distant night sounds. The gentle rhythm of his breathing matched the quiet sway of the curtains that moved with the breeze. Soon his mind slipped into a dream where he walked through a vast garden, unlike any he had ever seen. The trees were heavy with golden fruit, and the rivers shimmered like liquid light. He touched the leaf, and it hummed softly, as if alive with divine energy. The narrator spoke gently. In the garden of your mind, the seeds of your thoughts grow into. The life you live, plant faith and gratitude, and you will harvest abundance and peace. Solomon wandered along a stone path lined with flowers that glowed in the moonlight. In the distance, he saw a great table set with bread, honey, figs, and cups of water that sparkled like diamonds under the night sky. He sat and tasted the bread, which felt warm in his hands and melted softly on his tongue. And as he ate, he felt not hunger, but a deep sense of completeness. He rose and continued walking until he reached a fountain carved from crystal, its water rising and falling in a rhythm like a heartbeat. He leaned closer and saw his reflection ripple across the surface. Behind him, in the water's reflection, he saw cities, caravans, and smiling faces of people he had never met. And he understood they were all part of the blessings his kingdom shared. The narrator whispered, "True wealth is not only in what you hold, but in what you give, and the joy that flows from your hands to the world." Solomon felt light as the wind and walked further until he found a gate made of vines that opened on its own. Beyond it was a hill overlooking the sunrise, and he stood there as the first rays of light touched his skin. Warm and full of promise, he lifted his hands and whispered thank you into the new day, and his voice carried across the horizon, waking him softly back into his bed where the real sun was rising, golden light filling his chamber. His eyes opened slowly, and a gentle smile curved his lips as he realized that the dream was a reflection of the life he was already living and the one he was still creating. The narrator returned like a soft wind. When you rise with gratitude and align your heart with abundance, the day becomes your servant, and wealth walks quietly toward you with every breath you take. The morning sun rose higher over Jerusalem, spilling gold over the palace walls and bathing the city in soft warmth. King Solomon stepped out onto his balcony, feeling the cool stone under his bare feet. He stretched his arms slowly and let the light touch his face. The gentle wind carried the scent of olives and blooming flowers from the gardens below. He watched as the city awakened, merchants arranging colorful fabrics in the market, children running down the narrow streets with laughter, and farmers guiding donkeys loaded with fresh grapes and figs. He took a deep breath and whispered a silent thank you to the day, knowing that every moment of gratitude planted an invisible seed for future blessings. He turned back into the chamber and carefully put on his robes of soft white linen, tied with a golden sash. He walked to the small table where a silver pitcher of water and a clay cup waited. He poured the water slowly, watching the light bend through it, and drank in small sips. Feeling the coolness flow through him like a river, the narrator spoke softly. Wealth is not only in coins or treasures. It is in the calmness you carry, in the gratitude you practice, in the choices that open doors unseen. Solomon spent the day walking through the palace gardens, touching the leaves, feeling the sun on his skin, stopping to listen to the soft buzz of bees as they moved from flower to flower. And with each step, he thought about how his mind, like his gardens, could only flourish when cared for with patience and belief. As the day drew to an end, he sat in the great hall, alone, while the last light of the sun painted the walls in orange and red. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift to the ships on distant seas, the cities rising in his lands, and the quiet joy of his people. The narrator's voice became steady and clear. Listen to these words and let them sink deep into your mind. You are worthy of abundance. You are open to receive wealth. Opportunities flow to you like rivers finding the ocean. Every day you align with gratitude and patience, and every night the universe rearranges itself to bless you. Your hands are ready to give and therefore ready to receive. Hold this truth gently in your heart. Now take a slow breath and release the tension of the day. Let your mind rest. Let your heart expand with quiet joy. Feel the weight of prosperity settling over your life like a soft blanket. The narrator paused and then spoke one last time in a whisper. Are you still awake? If you are still awake, leave a comment saying you are still here. And if you are ready for more, let us go into another story. A new journey, a new lesson, and a new path to your quiet and prosperous dreams.